I'd like to ask a follow-up on that. So you get to Brown. You said by that point you did have your eye on several possible PhD programs.
Yes.
So why Ohio State then?
Yeah, well, you're going to hear a story of somebody who just was a damn fool, didn't know what he was doing, and ought to have been wiped out by his ignorance, because that was it. I did some of the obvious things. I applied to the obvious places, or I began to apply to Harvard, Yale, Princeton. I think that those may have been the big deal places.
Okay.
And then I realized, hey, you may not get into those places, so you got to try some other place. How? I just went to the college catalogs, looked up what they taught, and saw how they liked the courses. Did you ever hear anybody so ignorant in your life? You too?
Yeah.
I didn't know the professors at any of these places. I didn't know what they meant. I certainly never heard of the guys at Ohio State.
Okay. So you didn't go to work with someone in particular?
Absolutely didn't know anybody.
Okay.
So I applied. I applied to Yale. I sent away for an application form to Yale. And when I looked at it showed you what a cheeky idiot I was. I remember there's a question that was probably still there that you had to fill out as one of the answers in your application. Right. You didn't apply to Yale graduate school.
Not to grad school
Yeah,
here.
yeah. So anyway, I was wondering if it's still there. The question was, tell us why you want to be a historian. For some reason, that infuriated me. It seemed to be such an either obvious or impossible, but nothing in between, you know. And so I just threw it in the wastebasket. To show you, I mean,
I don't want to go to a place that asked me this question.
I didn't even. That was that. So, I think that was about it. Long story short, admitted and offered financial aid at two places, Princeton and Ohio State. And the critical element in the story is, a year after I went to Brown, I got married. And so I was now married, and this will all be part of the picture. And the critical thing, do I go to Princeton or do I go to Ohio State? And I realized the critical question was, which one is further away from my mother? It's not that I didn't love my mother, but I realized chance of my marriage surviving would be reduced by every mile I was closer to my mother. That was it. And so I turned Princeton down and I went to Ohio
State.
Okay. Good choice.
It was a good choice. By the way, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was a really good decision as I later learned.
Yeah.
The guy at Princeton was a very good scholar, but he was interested in all kinds of things that had no interest to me whatsoever. And the other thing that I realized was very important, but I wasn't smart enough to know it then, was that ancient history at Princeton was taught in the classics department, and at Ohio State in the history department. Now, I am a historian. I am a classical historian, but I'm a historian. So I think in ways that go along those lines. So if I'm not doing ancient history, I would rather be doing modern German history than I would be doing Sophocles.
Right.
And so it really would have been the wrong move.
Right.
You know, by the way, years later, Al Bernstein, when he came back from Oxford, went to Princeton. Couldn't stand it. Transferred to Cornell.
I knew he transferred to Cornell, I didn't know why.
Yes.
Why did, if I may depart from the script slightly, how would the training have been different in the classics department from a history department?
I would not have been permitted to study any history except ancient history.
Oh, okay.
And I would have been required to take all kinds of special subfields in classics, which are worthy, but which weren't very interesting to me. So that was the big difference.
Gotcha.
Whereas at Ohio State, they had a program that was so perfect. I didn't understand any of this, you know that.
Okay.
That was so perfectly shaped for my interests and needs that I can only believe that somebody is looking out after me.
So so you get to Ohio State not knowing who you want to work
Right.
with. Did you have a dissertation topic in
Nope.
mind at that? Okay, so how did you pick the advisor and the dissertation
Oh, it was
topic?
obvious. There was only one ancient historian.
Okay, that made your mind for you.
Yeah.
And then how did you work your way towards...
Who was it?
Will McDonald.
Good question. And then, so how did you work your way towards your dissertation topic?
Well, here's what happened. I finished my exams. Now I have to get a dissertation topic. Nobody told me what to do or how to do it. But I thought to myself, I was very interested. I was very interested in political, military, diplomatic history, the things that I spent the rest of my life working with. And that meant the Peloponnesian War, a lot of that. And then I realized, I thought I realized, that that's been done. Everybody and his brother has written about Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War. What more can there possibly be to say? On the other hand, for me, the years after the Peloponnesian War were dark. I knew sort of what you needed to know to get through exams, but I never had the feeling that there was stuff there that was the equivalent of the stuff that comes before. So I said, why don't I start reading in the major sources for that period and just see if anything occurs that looks like it's worth my attention. So, the main narrative source for that period is Xenophon, it's Hellenica, and then it's Diodorus, Plutarch, folks like that. And I began reading that, and I was poking along, starting in 404 in my unimaginative way, when I got down to the Corinthian War, and I got down specifically to the event in the 390s when we hear about a revolution in Corinth. Oh, by the way, I started, and I want to get out of Athens because Athens will also be overdone.
Okay.
And so I didn't know yet that I was going to do Corinth, but I was looking for some place that wouldn't be Athens.
Okay.
There was this revolution in Corinth that looked sort of interesting. And then I began to read modern writers about it. And after a while, I was struck by a very interesting thing. They each saw two factions involved in these things in Corinth. But they didn't agree as to what the factions were. They had different names for the factions, but the names also represented different kinds of people.
Okay.
So I tried to figure it out. I worked it, and finally the thought came to me, the reason this is happening is because there were not two factions in Corinth, there were three. And once that idea was there, I applied it to try to explain events that were otherwise murky or impossible to understand. And it seemed to me they all fell into place.
So that was really your eureka moment, was figuring that it was 3, not 2.
That was the great breakthrough.
Okay.
So then when I realized that that was so, I thought I would try to write a history of Corinth from the end of the Peloponnesian War down to the end of the Greek freedom, 336, and that's what I did.
Right. And was that, so you said there was a lot on Athens, presumably a lot on Sparta as well.
Yeah.
And so, was this there's a, sort of tail wagging the dog is a big concept today in diplomatic history? Were you thinking in terms of, that you were studying a smaller power as a kind of an angle into some of the larger stuff?
It's just, I started out by saying, I want to get away from the main line.
Okay.
And then I lucked into this city of a high rank and importance, not a no place.
Right.
But definitely second string city. And it had an interesting thing.
Right.
Now, once, you see, the rest grew out of that. Once I realized, I thought I showed, that there were these three groups, I thought, let's see if that shows up in the history of Corinth at other times, not just in the middle of this revolution. And I found myself thinking yes. And this is the most debatable thing about what I wrote, and that is, I wanted to connect them with socio-economic groups to the extent that would be at all possible. And then you could see Corinth behaving in this way or that way, most people hadn't even asked the question, why did Corinth do that? Of course, who cares about Corinth? But even if they hadn't really known what to do with it.
Right.
Suddenly I thought, that actually helps to help explain Corinthian behavior. And I called the dissertation Politics and Policy in Corinth,
Okay.
in the period I was talking about. And that was the insight, essentially. It was the connection between politics and the foreign policy.
That's been a major thread of your work from the get-go then, the connection between the
Yes.
domestic and the foreign.
Absolutely.
Okay, that starts very
But
early.
there's one loose end there. You said when you got to Ohio State, you were already very interested in military and diplomatic history.
Yes.
Could you just rewind a little and tell us where that developed? Was it what you were saying as a child? You were looking at the war.
That's really what I was
the
most
shadow of the war. How could this have happened?
That's right. And politics always fascinated me. And it seemed
Why, Don?
it seemed to me that's where the action was. And sure, war was always there as a big thing in my mind, but war and politics seemed to me to be in the same ballgame. And so I'm never able to think about them apart.
Right.
So it was natural, and that's what I meant by history to an incredible degree. Nobody in those days knew anything about social history. Very little was known about economic history, so I didn't have to worry about people telling me, why don't you look at those things?
Right.
I looked at the things that were interesting to me.
But ended up, finding your way towards some of the socioeconomic stuff.
Yes, but in a very superficial way, the modern scholars would say.
Okay.
You might be gratified to know that Corinth still features prominently at OSU's Class Ancient History program because my colleague Timothy Gregory has an ongoing excavation at Izmir,
Of course.
which is just outside.
Of
so
course.
Your,
I'm glad to hear
your
that.
interest in Corinth has borne fruit. And every year we have interns who go there and spend what used to be a quarter of our semester working at Izmir and learning on the ground what
That's a
Greek
great
civilization
thing.
was.
That's a great thing.
It's just a coincidence that it's right next to
Oh,
us.
that's
So you
funny.
say.
That's funny.
So at Ohio State, you worked with
Will McDonald. Yes.
and who were the major influences on you there?
There were some. I learned more about teaching at Ohio State than any place else, and I had the good fortune to have a number of really outstanding teachers, and each one of them different from the other, so that you could learn different things from different ones. But one great thing was the requirement. Your oral examination in history in those days, what I can't remember with certainty was whether you were required to be examined on 5 fields or 6. I'm not sure.
It was 4 not so long ago, it's now 3.
That's the tendency, of
Right,
course.
so maybe 5 or 6.
It was 5 or
either is
6.
plausible.
So you had to take courses and this was what they wanted you to do.
Right.
And it was so different. I remember how struck I was when I came to Yale and how appalled I was to see how the graduate program was so narrowly defined towards working to write your dissertation. And what kind of historical education you got apart from that was of nobody's interest. I'm exaggerating, but it was really very trivial compared, even to Cornell.
Do you remember what your fields were?
Hey, I'm going to tell you my fields,
Okay.
because that'll get you to my teachers.
Okay,
Well,
good.
the way that I think they divided the fields, I think there was one field that was ancient Near East,
Okay.
pre-Greek stuff, and the other one was classical Greeks and Romans.
Okay.
That's 2 fields, I think.
Okay.
The other one, the next one up, I think, was Tudor and Stuart England. Oh yes, and you had to divide them between America and not America.
Okay.
And
Still do.
And so I had recent American history, meaning really 20th century. This was 1955 when I showed up, so that's how much of a 20th century there was. And the history of American foreign policy.
Okay.
Oh, sure, I did have 6, because that's 5, isn't it?
Hey, that was
1,
6 right there.
No, that was 5, I think.
2, 3, 4. I only have 5.
Yeah, 5.
Ancient Near East, Greek
That's
and Romans, unless Greeks and Romans were separate.
No. But
Tudor,
I
Stuart
had
England,
US.
recent US, and
And US
history of
foreign policy.
American foreign policy.
I did have 6 because I can remember the 6th. The 6th was classics. there was a classics professor on the board who would then question me about all things classical, literature, philosophy, whatever it was in the world.
Okay.
So, you know, I have always thought I benefited enormously from the character of that program, just that. I think I had an advantage over lots of folks because I knew a little bit about those things.
How long did it take you to complete the classwork portion?
Not very long. I think I arrived in the fall of '55, and I got my degree in the spring of '58.
Wow. Okay.
So you were going to tell us who the teachers
Yeah,
were
I
in
will.
this
Yeah,
field?
that's right.
I will. Well, Will McDonald was a marvelous, what a lucky thing to stumble into a man like that. He was an incredibly smart, learned man. He had gotten a double first in greats at Oxford.
That's as high as you can get.
So, I mean, you can tell what kind of a brain he had. And he was a person of very broad interests and marvelous. But I think he wrote 2 or 3 excellent articles published in the very best journals, Journal of Roman Studies, stuff like that. Never wrote another word on ancient history. I think what happened, I don't know, a lot of this is just speculation, but he became very, very interested in art, especially painting. And I know a great deal of his life was engaged in aspects of that. I don't mean he painted himself, but it is. So he had no standing in the scholarly world. Hardly anybody ever heard of him. But he was a man of incredible intelligence, fantastic learning, and just a fine person on top of that.
Right.
I was extremely lucky in running into him. Another teacher that had, one guy really had a terrific impact on me was Foster Ray Dulles.
And I have a question for you about him, but
Fire
please.
away. Well, okay. What was great about him? He was a magnificent lecturer. He just was a naturally brilliant lecturer. And, you know, listening to really terrific people is one good way to learn how to be better. And so that was one thing. But more than that for me, from my standpoint of what I learned about teaching, he taught a seminar. And I will tell you that, in my experience, 9 out of 10 seminars are the worst courses there are. Nobody knows how to teach a seminar, is my generalization. A typical thing is everybody in the seminar has one project for the semester. It's his own project. He's going to write that essay in that course, and that's what he's really interested in. That's what the grade is going to be about, and so on. What happens in the classes in between is hit or miss, depending on whoever is teaching. But mostly, not much happens, is my experience. You may have had better luck than I did, but that was my experience. So, he was the first one who broke with that experience. By the way, it was true, but it was less true of Harvey Goldberg's seminar. Just because Harvey Goldberg was such a bright and interesting guy, there was no way you could be bored sitting there with Harvey Goldberg for a couple of hours. Other guys, you could manage it. But anyway, Dulles didn't arrange it that way. Dulles had his own method. So each day, each time you met, one of the students had written a paper, and he read the paper to the class, and then Dulles started working him over and began putting questions to him, eliciting significant, or everything you would want to elicit. And the class, there was pressure on the class to join in this, so nobody was sleeping because everybody was engaged, answering questions, asking questions, and Dulles basically running this little seance which everybody was engaged in. It was the highlight of the week for me, you know. That was an intellectual experience that I didn't get. And so I knew immediately if I ever had to teach a seminar, I'd start with that.
Right.
You know? So that was, that combination of things was, as brilliant a lecturer as he was, and then this remarkable approach to teaching. Now there was one thing about Dulles, apart from his natural gifts, that probably had something to do with the qualities that I liked about him. He had been a professional journalist. He had written, and he had been a kind of a foreign correspondent for the Herald Tribune in the old days when it existed. And so for him, all of the positive things about journalism were at play here. Seeking out all the facts and all of the evidences, and dubious, if not cynical, attitudes about what the answers are. There was a kind of a sophistication and a reality about the way he thought about these things that was refreshing as could be, and could be applied to any kind of historical question.
Right.
You know the history department building is named after him.
I do.
The Dulles in Dulles Hall is Foster A. Dulles.
I know, and that warmed my heart. He was a cousin of John Foster.
That's
Dulles.
right. Right.
He was the Democratic Dulles.
But he was still a very good teacher.
Oh, he was a wonderful teacher. And by the way, contemporary politics never came into anything he ever said or taught. He taught history.
Right. So my question about
Yeah.
Foster A. Dulles is, I think I remember you telling me that at your dissertation defense,
Yes.
that he was just could not comprehend that so much of your thesis could turn on one word.
It actually turned out that it was actually a little worse than that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
What happened was, in that rebellion in that revolution in Corinth I'm talking about, one of the key clues is that it's Diodorus of Sicily, where the passage is. And there's something that says about who are the people who made this revolution is what they're talking about. And what I said was certain men who were eager for democracy.
Okay.
And the word democracy, that is demokratia,
Okay.
the Greek word for democracy. Well, the trouble was, that word is not in the manuscripts.
Okay.
What is in the manuscript is a couple of words that do not include demokratia.
Okay.
But the trouble with them is they don't make any sense. It's obviously a flawed spot in the manuscript. The copyist didn't get it right.
Okay.
So over the centuries, scholars have attempted to amend that passage
To make
to
more
come
sense.
to make more sense. And there's one that gained general acceptance. The guy had a wonderful name, he's a German, of course, named Wurm. And as somebody on my board said, you can believe what's being said by some worm? But he said, no, that what should be there is demokratia.
Okay.
And that's what shows up in most of the manuscripts. If you're reading, for instance, the Loeb Classical Library, it's there, and then there's a footnote that says Wurm emendation,
Right.
and so on. So, as I had to tell, Dulles said about what you said, and I said, it's worse than that, Professor Dulles, that word isn't in the text.
Nice.
And he said,
Oh my God. Think of an
You're classicist.
Think of a modern American
Sure.
historian who's got 9 million documents for
Right.
everything.
Right.
Because this guy doesn't even have a word.
Right.
so who else apart from MacDonald and Dulles?
It was a guy named Clayton Roberts.
Yeah, he was your English
Did
tutor
you?
and
He
steward.
wasn't there when
I
you.
just overlapped with him.
Well, I just was so taken with him. All good things that you could say about a teacher, you would say about him. But there was this one quality that really had an impact on me. We would be discussing some issue in his class, and he would have taken a position, and he was now be defending it against questions that we were putting to him. And then somebody would make a point. This would be not happen often, but it happened more than once. And somebody would say, and Roberts would stop, and he would say, yes, I retreat. I'll pick up the argument here because I can't answer that.
Huh.
Boy, that blew me away. I mean, it wasn't just, the decency of the man. What he was saying is, the idea is to get it right.
Right.
The idea is not to show how smart you are or how, whatever. The idea is get it right. So anything that'll help, take it.
Right.
It had such. I have so many times I've had the vision of Roberts in my eyes when I thought, wait a minute, you don't know the answer. Back off. Wait and see.
Right.
So
A real
he
humility to that.
really was. I mean, but he was just wonderful in all other respects. So what have I got? Harvey was not on my board. Harvey never examined me.
Okay.
He just I just took a seminar with him. So I you know. But all you can say about Harvey is what you all know. He was a brilliant lecturer, and he ran a seminar well. He ran it in a traditional way, but his talents were so great that he made it really interesting. He didn't just stand there and let you guys have your shot and nothing was going on. He would participate. He would straighten you out when you went wrong, and he would be himself, an really interesting person.
Right. Did some people have said how meticulous he was in his preparation, and that he used to, practically work himself into a state of exhaustion?
I'm sure that's right, because
Okay.
everything he did, he overdid.
Okay.
I mean, that's certainly the way it was. But I owe you this one Harvey Goldberg story that I just have to tell you.
Please.
By the way, I never roomed with him.
It was something you told me years before, and I thought I got it wrong. And you
No,
said
but
it was
I know-
difficult going around finding a room.
But I know why you might have thought that. It'll come into this story. Okay. No, I didn't. But I only knew Harvey, first of all, as being in his seminar. And second of all, he was very friendly with graduate students, and he was a guy you would talk to about anything and so on. So I felt very much comfortable with him. But this is the story Harvey told us. Now it gets at one of your topics. What was Columbus like in the 1950s? Harvey was a bachelor, and he lived in a rooming house right off campus. Is that the story?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, this all sounds like fiction, but his landlady was known as Ma Brown. That's just the way it was.
Okay.
And she had her rigorous rules for her boarders, which included not having women in their rooms. And that was pretty much the essence of it. So Harvey tells the tale one night, middle of the night. He gets woken up by screaming and yelling in the halls. Ma Brown is carrying on something terrible. It seems that, by the way, Harvey was very much the senior presence in that room. He was sort of the intermediary between Ma Brown and the younger kids that were living there. So there's all screaming going on. Harvey goes out to see what's happening, and it turns out that one of the roomers had brought a woman into his room, and she was Japanese. 1955. And so Harvey goes in and he's trying to spread oil on troubled waters. And now, Ma, you know, this is not, you mustn't get too excited. These things happen. Nah, nah, nah. And then he says, you know, he's trying to make a comment all about it. She calms down a bit. And finally she says, Harvey, you know I'm not bigoted. I got nothing against Jews.
Story.
I got nothing against Negroes, only she didn't say Negroes. But there's one thing. No nips. That was Columbus, Ohio, 1955.
I had taken this as more personal, that it was also you had found it hard to find accommodation.
I've heard
And
that
that you
story.
were, that's the one I remember, that you were turned away.
Well, not
you
quite.
were a Jew. And I'd somehow put the two
It was
stories of you and Harvey
and
together.
I would have told them that one after the other, as I'm about to do now.
Please.
When my wife and I went out there, we were looking for an apartment, wandering around West 5th Street, as it turned out.
No, it was still there.
There.
Big houses.
Just short of Olentangy Road, you know, that block.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was this brick house, and we went up and rang the bell. The door opened about 2 inches. This was Midwestern hospitality. And she began to talk to us and question us and so on and so forth. And finally, she had concluded that we were desirable tenants. So now her game switched. Now she was going to persuade us that this was the place we want to live. Is it okay for me to use terrible words here?
Absolutely, because it's reported.
Okay.
We know you would never use them, Don.
Well, you'll see why in a minute. And so she was telling us about the wonders of the house there on West 5th Street and all the good things that are about it. And she said, this is a very fine neighborhood, no niggers. And, you know, we had just come from Brooklyn. And we almost fell over backwards. We were so stunned. Not so stunned that we didn't take the apartment. It was mighty hard to get an apartment. But again, we felt, where are we?
Right.
We had these prejudices.
Right.
We're in the great American desert. This is Ohio.
Well, remember they have book burning at Broughton High.
Oh, yes.
And the House Un-American Activities Committee has its own special Ohio branch.
Oh, no, and the places, you know, all of our prejudices were probably accurate. But we had them. And when we caught, there's one more, let's see if I can remember this.
The prejudices you and your wife had about what Ohio was going to be
Yeah,
like, you mean?
yeah. We thought, my God, we're going to the frontier. This
Right,
is
right.
So we now we're in this apartment. We've been living there a week or two, and we've bought a television set, and we're watching the television set, and it's election stuff coming up sometime in the future, and one of the candidates is the current mayor of Columbus. His name is Maynard Jack Sensenbrenner. I'll never forget.
That's right, yes.
So he is talking, and he's explaining mainly about what a bum the opponent is. And all the terrible. By the way, his profession, Sensenbrenner's profession, was he was a Bible salesman. So that in itself, you can imagine how that hit us right down in there. But so
In the Midwest, you get that all the time.
yeah,
Still.
yeah, even now.
It's
Amazing.
the Bible based. My students, the Reformation class, they bring their Bibles
Wow.
to check that I'm quoting correctly.
I didn't realize that. Wow. So anyway, he goes on, and finally he's finished running down his opponent, and he says, with a crafty little smile on his face, he says, "Now you may wonder, why does the good Lord allow men like this to flourish?" And now the real smile. It's the devil. He's always with us. And we said, where are we? What planet is this? I just want to paint a picture of innocence abroad. We were so...
Debating has really gone downhill in politics since then, hasn't it, Don?
Wait, really?
Where are lines like that in the current debates? So this has to be 55-56.
It's 55.
It's moving up to the
It's
56
55,
election.
yeah.
So who became your friends? Were you friends with graduate students?
We were friends with graduate
Okay.
students. They were very, very nice people. Got to be good friends with a number of them. And all in all, that was a very good side of life. Our social life consisted of seeing each other
Right,
at little parties, whatever it was.
right.
And they couldn't have been nicer.
How much of a... I mean, I was also married as a grad student, and that was just wonderful. I don't know how I would have survived as a bachelor. It was just such a lonely life.
Well, it's true, because I had 1 year as a graduate student without being married, so I could compare
Right.
the two. And indeed, the way I handled it that first year was to go home every weekend so I could see my girl. I couldn't have taken it, I think, if I had...
It's just from Brown, because you were married when you went to
Yeah,
Columbia.
you could take a bus and you could get to New
To
York,
get back to Brooklyn.
and that would be that. So no, right, and you know, my wife got me through graduate school in every way. Not only did she provide me with the companionship that you need not to go crazy, she worked. She had a job always. At Ohio State, she worked in one of the in the library. She worked in the library system, and they moved her around from place to place. But that was her job there.
Right.
So she was, you know, that was a time when women regularly sacrificed themselves, extraordinarily.
I was going to ask why your sister didn't go to college. It's something we left untied. Was
Yeah,
that
well,
because it was not the custom?
It was not the custom. She wasn't academically interested anyway. But I think more than that, she had to bear all the burden and the brunt of coping with a very hard life, coping with my mother having a very hard life. I was too young to be burdened, to be held responsible for anything. She had a heavy set of burdens, psychologically and practically. It would have been really hard for her. The whole package just never occurred to her. Really.
She had to be an adult, practically.
That's
Sounds
right.
Like, I mean,
That's right. But she was, by the way, she was a very intelligent person,
Right.
and I haven't got the slightest doubt that she would have done fine if she ever went to college.
Right.
But as you say too, people didn't do that.
Like you, I didn't know anyone who'd been to college when I was at school, and I went to a posh school,
Right.
but not one of the kids I knew had parents who'd gone to college.
That's the way it was. Yeah.
Can I just take you back over, because this is obviously of great interest, the other people who were a formative influence. Clayton Roberts, a lot of people around OSU will remember. What about the other three fields?
Let's see.
You're diplomatic in particular, the history of American diplomacy.
I think we should pass over that. In
Okay,
silence.
all right, fine. The
That was-
classics, recent US history classics.
But recent U.S. history was Dulles.
Adults.
Oh, so sorry, okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Classics, a wonderful teacher. Seems like I had a lot of luck with Maine people. this guy, Mr.
Shots.
Forbes, had been raised in Maine, and he was just everybody's idea of what a good old classics professor ought to be. He was very, very good at his trade. He was very assiduous in helping you learn these things. His classes were not barn burners, but they were engaging, and your time was never wasted. You learned something while you were there, and he was just an enormously kind person, which a graduate student needs a little kindness from time to time.
Yes. Absolutely. No further comments. Door's so wide open at the moment, but no comment. Did you want to follow up on his teachers? Because I had another question.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's it. I
Okay.
just wanted to be sure we got on record all the people who you felt.
They were the big,
and as you
big
said,
influences.
this was where you really learned to teach.
That's right. Because I mean,
Because
I
you
learned,
had the role models that came up earlier in our conversation.
absolutely, yes.
Did you get much insight into Goldberg as a scholar, or more
Yes.
as a teacher at that point?
Both.
Both. Okay.
First of all, Harvey was, I don't know if he was a card-carrying communist. I don't know if he was or not. But he was blatantly a socialist of some kind. And he used to like to use the word radical. That was his favorite thing. And I used to drive him crazy. I would say, hey, you don't have to be a communist like you guys to be a radical. He said, yeah, who do you think is a radical? I didn't know what I was talking about. I said, Harry Truman's a radical. He almost had a hemorrhage. So how did we get to Harvey? What was the topic?
The question was
was
whether
asking-
you could see. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Because you talked about him as a teacher, I was curious if you saw much of him as a scholar.
Yes, I had. First of all, the way he conducted his seminar was a lesson in scholarship. He was really very professional and very good about helping you to understand first, how do you discover a historical problem that needs attention and is worthy of doing it? And then in his own field, which was France around the turn of the 20th century, how do you go about researching such an activity? And those are the more obvious but important things, and he would show you how to do them. And then the kinds of questions you put, the kind of ways you try to reach a judgment. And I totally admired his professionalism in that. Ideology played no part in that. They probably would have played a part in which issues he chose to look into and so on and so forth. But when he looked into them, you knew that was the right way to do it. And I thought that helped me quite a lot. When I got the greatest admiration for Harvey's scholarship was when I read his book on Jaurès.
Okay.
he loved Jaurès more than anybody who had ever lived, I think. Which makes me think he probably wasn't a card-carrying communist.
Socialist, right? Or radical.
Radical socialist, something like that. But Jaurès, I think he would have been Jaurès if he could have. And Jaurès, as socialists go, was sort of kind of moderate.
Okay.
So, anyway, it was a marvelous piece of work because, on the one hand, it was clear he had the highest possible admiration for his subject. This is not so bad in the biographer if he can take the next step, which was, I thought, Harvey took. He really tried very hard to be objective in his evaluations of these things, and one can objectively do that and come to the conclusion this was a good guy. And I found him very persuasive, but I found him, it was a beautiful piece of work, as was what I thought. Not too many books that you read in history you come away thinking that was beautiful. And by beautiful, I don't necessarily mean stylistically, although it was fine. It was the mind at work.
Right.
Seeing an elegant, good mind at work, working in a professional way, made me feel very good because I wanted to admire his work, but I wouldn't have if I didn't really find it that way.
Right.
Why didn't you go on and do biography yourself?
I did.
Pericles,
Oh,
right?
okay, right. And were you influenced by
No.
Harvey's approach in any way?
Oh no, it's so different. You know, with Harvey,
I mean, they both come to a sudden end.
it's
Jaurès is shot in the middle of a speech, and
Pericles dies from the plague.
Right.
But the trouble is that the world of Jaurès is so filled with information and all the things that make biography such a rich thing when it can be. And we know so little about Pericles. People I've said, and I think they were right, you really can't write a biography of Pericles. You can do something with Pericles' life. And I didn't really write a biography because you can't. I think the title of that book was Pericles and the Birth of Athenian Democracy.
The reason I jumped a moment ago is I realised that Kagan is right behind you. So I bet we could pluck a copy of the book from your shelf and verify whether you remember the title of your own book.
Pericles is right behind you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's in French though, I think.
Well.
So anyway, no, but it is Pericles and the Birth of Athenian Democracy. Right. And really, I was writing about Pericles' Athens, at least as much as I was writing about Pericles. So it's not you can't really make a perfect comparison.
Right.
No, I think I never really wrote a legitimate biography. But how's an ancient historian going to write a legitimate biography?
When do you think is the first one? Caesar? Augustus, maybe? When do you think it does become possible? When is there enough stuff?
It never does.
It never does, okay.
It never does. Okay.
I'm just taking notes.
Okay. I didn't know if you had another follow-up on. So, on Goldberg, did you stay in touch with graduate cohort mates as you moved on?
For some years, I exchanged letters with some of my friends back there, and over time,
Right.
it faded out. But we all went in different places. We never had the opportunity to see each other much.
Okay.
So I basically lost touch with most of those folks.
Okay.
Did you keep in touch with any of your chums from Brown or Brooklyn College?
Brooklyn College, yes. The guys I grew up with in Brownsville who went to Brooklyn College with me, and I'm sad to say one of them died just less than a year ago. But it's funny, a batch of us just sort of just lived forever. It was until he died. There were four of us who were really sort of closer than other guys in our neighborhood. And up until last year, all of us were still around, and so were the wives we married. It's worth remembering that in my world, the 1950s were a very unadventurous age. People did that in those days.
And do the remaining three of you and your wives, do you all still keep in touch, or?
Actually, the guy who died was the one I was closest to, and he was he was better at keeping us all plugged. The other three, not me, the other three all live around the New York area. So no, that's not true. One of them actually is in D.C. Okay. So I really relied on them to sort of bring me in because I didn't see them very much.
While your mother was alive, presumably though, you would go back to
Yes.
Brooklyn and then you would
Yes.
see them because they were still there too.
As long as they were.
As long
yeah.
as they were, yeah.
Depends the times, right. But they stayed in the New York area, except for Hertie, who went off to the, he was an interesting guy, one of my friends from Brownsville. He didn't go to Brooklyn College, he went to City College. Just tell you, he was a foreign service officer. He ended up his days first as an ambassador to some African country, and then subsequently to the African desk in the State Department. And I'm very proud of him. But they were all very successful guys. It just makes you feel very good. Everyone came from the same circumstances that I described for myself in some way or other. They all went to municipal colleges, and they all had remarkably successful careers, but remarkably successful lives. It's a kind of a marvelous American success story, you know, in the old traditional patting ourselves on the back way. That makes a good case if you think about those guys. And it shows you, I mean, you know, the positive side. I was complaining about the dangers of government having powers and getting involved in it, but of course there's the flip side. You know, we could go to as good a college as you would want to go to. You know what?
How did you? I'm sorry. Carry on.
No, you can say.
I was just going to say, but how did you pay for it?
That's what I was about to tell
That's
you.
right.
Great minds.
I did have to pay a fee to go to Brooklyn College. $10 a semester.
Wow.
The library fee. Nothing else. My wife went to Hunter College, which was also part of the system. They only charged them $5. That was it. But of course, the thing this is the flip side. In those days, the only thing that counted when you were applying for admission was your record, your grades, and the exam that you took to get into the place. They didn't count anything else. Result was, it was sheer ability that was the case. The result was you had an entering class. I'll bet we could have given cards and spades to Harvard and Yale in those days. Because that's all that counted. They didn't care if your parents went there. They didn't care if you played football. That was it. And the result was that it was an incredibly good education because the students are more important than the teachers. It's my reading of it. The quality of the students is more determinative than the quality of the teachers. They're both important, but that's the thing. So that was made possible by the city of New York deciding that they wanted to do this for poor people. I don't want to tell them they were wrong. That seems like a good investment, and if people had to be taxed to do that, that was a good thing to do. It's not that I am a wild freeloader, whatever it is, but
Moocher, I believe that's the phrase that's going around.
yeah,
Yes.
that's right. So I just want that occurs to me as I think about these guys, all of whom, and that all folks in our generation, and some before us, and after us too.
Sounds like you had really first-rate teachers there too.
And there were some first-rate teachers, as anywhere else. Not so very many, but
Okay.
some.
Okay.
And that's the point. I don't think that their ratio was any lower than any top-notch college.
Right.
They had that percentage of good teachers,
Right.
I think.